Welcome to Sight and Sound Bites from the Eye and Ear Foundation of Pittsburgh. My name is Heather Kronis-Danek. I'm the Senior Director for Individual Giving for the Eye and Ear Foundation. I'm so excited to be a part of this presentation today. So the Eye and Ear Foundation, its sole mission is to raise funds for the research for the departments of otolaryngology and ophthalmology at the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine. We're going to start today a little differently. Usually I introduce everyone, but I am going to let Dr. Peter Santamaria of the Department of Otolaryngology do the honors for today's presentation, which is an engineer's perspective on medical innovation.
Thank you very much, Heather. This is actually going to be a lot of fun because I get to work with some amazing people, and two of them are Mohit Singhala and Carl Snyderman. And I know the webinar is called an engineer's perspective, but the only real engineer amongst us is Mohit. So we're going to have some perspectives from myself and Dr. Snyderman, who are clinicians that very much collaborate with engineers. So I guess it's a 360 perspective on medical innovation involving engineers. Just a little bit about myself. I'm the Division Chief of Otology and Neurotology, and I have a lab that is looking at different ways to work out how we can help people with hearing loss. But I also have a background in two innovation programs which started at Stanford Biodesign and SPARK, and I have a role here at the Office of Innovation and Entrepreneurship as the Director of Faculty Innovation here at the university. And we are launching our own SPARK program later this year. We have weekly sessions, which we call the Community of Innovators, and it's a cheeky advertisement that if you're involved in the ecosystem here, you're more than welcome to come to participate in that, either as an innovator or someone who's a mentor with experience. First, I'm going to hand you over to Dr. Singhala, and Mohit, if you want to give a quick introduction of your background, that'd be great.
Perfect. Thanks, Peter. So yeah, I'm a research assistant professor here in the Department of Otolaryngology, and I'm one of the directors for the UPMC Creates Lab, which is focused on improving the translational potential of the Pittsburgh healthcare ecosystem. My background is in mechanical engineering and robotics, and I've also done extensive work in innovation and translation. My training was also in two different institutes that teach design thinking for healthcare innovation. Namely Stanford Biodesign and Hopkins Center for Bioengineering, Innovation and Design. And in addition to surgical innovations, a lot of my background work has been in global health.
Thanks, Mohit. And Dr. Snyderman, I'll hand over to you for an introduction.
Hi, I'm a head and neck surgeon specializing in skull-based surgery. We've been fortunate at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center to have the premier skull-based center in the world for a long time now, and have been the forefront of two major paradigm shifts in skull-based surgery. And so I've been very fortunate to be part of that. And so surgical innovation is part of my career. My second career now, and over the last 10 plus years, has been working with engineering students on developing ideas with surgical innovation, working with class projects. And some of these have gone forward, such that I now have my first startup company specializing in a new type of endotracheal tube.
Thanks very much, Carl. So yes, I should have flicked to this photo first, so you can see us all there on the screen as well. I just wanted to give us more background on some of the things, and I'll get each of our panelists to talk about some of the things that they've been involved in. So a couple of different things. So I'm currently involved in 3 medical devices and 1 therapeutic. So the device on the left actually came out of some work that I did with Stanford Biodesign, which was a device that prevented you becoming cold during surgery. The second device, which is looking to be FDA approved later this year, is a sippy cup that can treat children with otitis media with effusion or eustachian tube dysfunction. And the third is a company around monitoring patients that have dizzy attacks in the home. And the fourth is as a therapeutic company looking at regenerating the tympanic membrane. So a lot of different types and styles of devices, as well as a therapeutic. I wanted just to pause there. Dr. Snyderman, you briefly mentioned one of your most recent innovations in terms of the endotracheal management. If you want to just give a little bit more background there, that'd be great.
Sure. This all started with a class project. I pitched an idea to some bioengineering students for a semester class, and assembled a team of students, and we came up with a new idea, a redesign of endotracheal tubes. The biggest problem with endotracheal tubes is they don't prevent aspiration, and patients who stay on a ventilator for more than 2 days have a high risk of developing complications such as ventilator-associated pneumonia. And so our design helps prevent that, and we developed IP through the University of Pittsburgh. We founded a company, licensed that IP, and so we have a startup company called Respare that's about 3 years old now, and we are working towards FDA submission for our product. I hope to have a product on the market in about a year.
I'm always interested because you know, a lot of us have different light bulb moments. What led you to decide this was a light bulb moment that you wanted to pursue and that you were motivated to track down?
Well, you always start with what you see every day. And so I encounter a lot of airway problems in my practice. And the problem I was trying to solve with an endotracheal tube was not the problem I ended up addressing with our product. But like many starts in innovation, you start in one area, but then you pivot and you may pursue another direction, and that's what happened. But there really was a light bulb moment. We were struggling with trying to make the current endotracheal tubes better. It just wasn't working, and we just sort of said, okay, let's really get back to the root problem. What's the problem? The problem is the cuff, and we said, okay, how can we get rid of the cuff? And that was a light bulb moment where we replaced the cuff with some soft, flexible baffles, and that's what led to our company.
Awesome. Mohit, you want to give any background of some products that you've been working on or working with?
Yes, I think one is I'll go off the light bulb moment thing, right? It like reminds me of a project we had done in orthopedics. This was around trying to reduce revision surgeries for ACL reconstructions. So the anterior cruciate ligament in the knee has a relatively higher rate for revisions. And we saw a surgeon at Hopkins making a small, change in how he was operating to make the surgery easier for him. And I always like it when you see there is some struggle with the existing tool, and then people are coming up with newer techniques to overcome that. And then as an engineer, you think, okay, how can I productize this, right? How can I take this surgical variation or this new thing that someone is trying to do and convert it into a product? So we created a surgical guide based on what that surgeon was doing. And for me, a fundamental thread in everything that I do has been, how can you break down clinical problems into more fundamental first principles like math and science problems? How can you approach the fundamental physics that's at play here and see if you can create something for it? The other thing that I usually like to work on is sometimes as an engineer, it's also important to know that an engineering solution is not required, which has been most of my most recent work in India in maternal health, where I spent a couple of years just observing how deliveries are done, how women are looked after during the prenatal care period, how children are cared for right after birth. And I realized that the solution that was needed was not necessarily a new technical fundamental principle, rather the taking things that we know work and refining them to work in the context of an Indian rural healthcare clinic. So a lot of my more recent work is trying to figure out how we can improve workflows, how we can integrate the newer digital health tools into making the lives of the providers easier and therefore having a greater impact on the patients that they're serving.
And I just wanted to highlight one of the focuses of our department is global otolaryngology. So it's a pleasure to have you involved and have that focus as well. I wanted to get into a little bit into process. So I am heavily biased because I was born and raised in these methodologies. But I'm going to pivot to you, Dr. Snyderman, because I know that you've come along, you were doing this way before we even heard about these methodologies. So I guess I wonder if you could maybe just describe your process, your innovation process. Where do you make the start when you typically innovate?
Yeah, I mean, it really does start with just everyday problems, your work environment. I mean, a day doesn't go by that I don't see problems that need fixing. And you sort of get in a habit of looking at the world with open eyes and looking for these problems. And so it is a skill you can develop. But everywhere you look, there are problems. Walking down the hall, the corridor in the hospital, I noticed people running into each other coming around a busy corner. And so it sparked an idea for how we could alert people about coming around corners so they don't run into each other. That hasn't resulted in a product, but the idea is there, and it was actually a class project. I have ideas about my feet hurt when I stand too long in the OR, and how can we improve the comfort of people who stand on their feet all day? One of my first patent was based on the principle that when we use a surgical drill and we're thinning the bone, we are taught to listen to a change in the pitch of the drill. If the pitch goes up, that tells us that the bone is getting very thin and you're about to encounter something on the other side of the bone, such as the brain. But that's not a skill you can really teach somebody. You can tell them what to listen for, but you can't really teach that to somebody. And so my idea was, how can we measure that objectively? And we actually received a patent that describes a process using machine learning that listens to the acoustic signature of drills and tells you when that pitch change occurs. And it's a much more efficient process than we do. That once again, that hasn't resulted in a company yet, but the idea is there. So everywhere you look, you identify these problems. And I keep a running list on my laptop. Every time I think of a new idea, a new invention, I make a little folder. And so I must have 30 or 40 folders there, waiting to be developed. But that's really what makes things so exciting in our field. I think the other thing is people who invent are naturally asking questions all the time. They're saying why, or what if, how can we do this better? Is there a better way to do this? They're always asking questions, and they're never happy with the status quo. And so you need to be a curious individual. You need to be looking for opportunities. You need to be looking at what other people are doing in other areas. Oftentimes, you'll discover a different specialty has the same problem, or they've solved a similar problem in a different way, and you can take that knowledge and bring it back to your own specialty.
It's also big to hear a lot, because you're actually talking about a lot of the foundations of biodesign with actually never having been formally trained in biodesign. So it's great to hear that perspective of someone who's acquired all those skills. And Mohit, I don't want if you give a slightly different perspective, having gone through the training. Is there any, where do you learn on how to start?
Yeah, I think it's interesting for me because being an engineer, for me, like understanding the problem has always been like, I just need to do that, right? Like for me, nothing is assumed, which can sometimes really help because like I'm almost forced to have a fresh perspective on a problem. Two things that I've learned is be very grateful for the opportunity to actually be able to talk to patients and shadow physicians. I think being in a place like UPMC and having that kind of access, being able to have conversations with people like Dr. Snyderman and you who are facing these problems, I think that is one great source of problem statements for innovation. The other thing that's core to my process is like how well can you define the problem, right? Like I like to make sure that I understand the problem deeply enough before I go out and think of solving it. And there are certain tools we use for that. One is namely need statement and coming up with a good set of criteria for what a solution should look like. I think that for me is a fertile starting point to then see, okay, now how can we put our engineering skills to test in collaboration with, let's say, a surgeon if it's a surgical problem, or a public health professional if it's a public health problem, or a social worker. So that is a core part of at least how I see problems. And the only thing I'll add to that is over time, I've also developed constraints to realize that you're trying to look for solutions that solve the problem best, and you may not necessarily be the source of that solution, right? Like, just because I have a background in mechanical engineering or robotics does not mean that every problem needs mechanical engineering or robotics. And knowing when to step back is also a very important part of at least my process of innovation.
Excellent. And so this kind of gets to the next step that I was going to ask, is that a lot of us think that we have good ideas, but then we don't really know what the next step is. So I'm going to do a little jump in there, but the first question, and that we've kind of already answered, is first is the evaluation of whether or not we even have a good idea, and then can you make it your actual good idea better? So it's a kind of a pause that we often do in that step. So the first step, do I have a good idea? And Mohit, I wanted to know if you wanted to address this. This is kind of the mantra that comes out is if you want to talk about technology, push or pull versus need push or pull.
Yep, I think historically the role that universities have played is to do research and then hope that that research finds its ways to the patient. And while that has been successful in some instances, it's not the best way to think about startups and entrepreneurship, right? So this model of developing a technology and then looking for an application is something we generally refer to as tech push. At Biodesign, we learned a very different philosophy, which has been now tried and tested and has proven its mettle over the last 2 to 3 decades, in that we start with user research, right? Immerse ourselves in the healthcare environment that involves not just the surgical OR, not just the clinic, but even day-to-day conversations with people. And that's something we sometimes forget, that healthcare is very universal. So we all go through healthcare issues at some point in time, and everyone has a story to tell. And you want to make a good assessment of what your providers are struggling with, what the patients are struggling with, and keep that at the core of, keep that as the main guiding light on what value you can provide through better engineering. So
Let me jump in. You all had asked for questions as they popped up. So question number 1, do you find that physicians are hesitant to use new technologies or techniques because they're used to a certain process, or if it helps them and the patient that they're eager to make changes for?
I'm gonna float this one to Carl.
Okay. Like most like adoption of most technologies, it's sort of a bell-shaped curve of adoption. You have early adopters, people who are always at the forefront, whether it's computers or anything else. And then you have at the other end extreme, you have the laggards, the people who are resistant to adopting any new technology. And most people are somewhere in between. But as a profession, I would say physicians are probably slow to adopt new technology. And so they sort of wait to see that it's been tested, that it works well. But you do have a small percentage of people who always are at the forefront trying new things and want to take chances, with new technologies. So I think it's something that you have to be a responsible steward of new technology. We need centers that will take chances, that will develop new ways of doing things, but we don't want to propagate that too widely until we have the evidence showing that it's safe and that it is effective.
Thank you. And then second question we have, as an engineer, do you think innovation happens more because people are looking for problems to solve? Kind of talked about that, or because they are good at recognizing a problem and finding ways to solve it?
I think that's an interesting one. I think, people are looking for problem can sometimes have a negative connotation, but in my experience, if you're trained, let's say you're undergrad, you're trained as an engineer and you want to do good in the world, you look for places where you want to, have an impact, and healthcare again rises to the top naturally for a lot of people. What good can I do with my skills? So I think part of that, like people looking for problem to solve, comes from a very good place. I do think that should be combined with the idea of, now that you are going to, like, let's validate the problem. Let's try and better understand the problem. Because we have to recognize, at least in my undergraduate engineering curriculum, the mindset was never to look for problems, right? I was taught many different solutions to the potential problems that I'll be asked to solve later on in life. So I think recognizing problems has traditionally not been part of engineering curriculums. So it's a skill that people have to be taught, but I do think it supplements your engineering education really well, and exponentially increases the impact that you can have.
Thank you. We will come back in a bit with more questions.
Thanks, Heather. Actually, I wanted to also expand on what Carl was saying about physician adoption of technology and innovations. I mean, the fundamental rule basis there is that all physicians want to do better for their patients, and they're always looking for better ways to help patients and things. And I think some of them come with, before you adopt them, required levels of evidence to get there before you bring them into your practice, because you have the status quo, you have your dogma, you have your current existing standard of care, which you're very familiar with. I think one of the tricks there is to kind of see, is when you're inventing, is to try and bring alignment of those physicians who are usually a key stakeholder in that process, is to try and understand, the nuances of how they go about that particular problem or practice. If your invention is going to make their life easier, the patient's life easier, it's a very relatively simple thing to do, then it usually is adopted faster than something that is a bit more technical and maybe costly and things like that. So there's obviously a full range. So I think part of the process that we sort of promote is, at the beginning, really getting to know your physician colleagues as part of that. So, Carl and I are like one physician in one specialty, but sometimes we don't necessarily have the private practice view. We don't have the other specialties view. We don't have the generalist view of the problem. So we try to involve that as much as possible. And if you can bring all that into alignment, it can usually lead to a little bit better adoption. But it is, as Carl said, a curve, and physicians tend to be late adopters. This is kind of the mantra that we kind of hear in design thinking, is beginning with the end in mind. And I just wanted to go over what that actually meant in that sort of term. So it is a few things. So the first thing that Mohit was alluding to is bringing the human context into it, understanding the patient disease and the problem. The second thing, which is really important to us in the US, is that health economics and the cost of our medical care is very high. So we need to have an understanding of what that actually is, and problems that cost a lot of money are really good targets for innovating. And the third thing is that when you start to think of innovating, you need to have a roadmap of what you're going to do, and that might be a need statement, which is a calculated sentence about what is your roadmap. But the other one is to think about it as particularly if you're developing a product or a therapeutic, is what that target product profile is. What are you aiming to do? And really having these three things at the forefront of when you're innovating really helps to drive towards the right solution. Just one example of that in my own work was the human context of having holes in the eardrum. So this is a really common problem. It's the most common reason for hearing loss in the developing world. But in my history of treating, Indigenous Australians, it was the highest incidence of chronic ear disease. Almost 50% of kids had this, and so it was a really big problem. But in the US, what that actually meant, it was 170,000 surgeries per year, and a very big cost. So it cost almost $20,000 to have that surgery. So it's relatively resource intense. It needed to be done under general anesthesia by a trained ENT surgeon. And so if we were going to develop a target product profile or a need statement, some of the key principles was to be better than the surgery. We didn't necessarily need to improve the surgery. You can see on the left there, the surgery was very highly successful with a 85 to 90% success rate. but the fact that the surgery cost money, required anesthesia, and required an ENT really drove us to try and innovate around doing something that was topical, that could be done in the clinic and without anesthesia. So just one way of showing how starting with the end in mind can be very helpful. This is kind of a neat concept, and I know we talk about this in biodesign a little bit. And so I'm going to just float this to Carl. So you mentioned that you have a folder of maybe 30 ideas at once. And clearly you can't work on all of them at once, or maybe even some of them at once. You need to really be strategic about how you decide what to do next. When you have all these problems, what drives your strategic focus on what to do next, or where do you see value in going after these problems or needs?
Yeah, I mean, we see lots of problems that don't require big solutions, and so they never really get addressed because there's no market for them. So one of the first questions you always ask yourself is this a big problem? It may be a big problem for me, but it may not be a big problem across my specialty or across medicine. And if it's not a big problem, then you're not going to get the investors to support your idea. You're not going to be able to build a successful product. Is it a practical solution? There are a lot of problems we can solve by throwing a lot of money at them, but they don't make economic sense. They're very difficult to do, may take 20 to 30 years to get there. I don't have that much time left, so I'm looking for quick and easy solutions to my problems. But does it address a meaningful problem? Is there a market for it? Is it something that people will use? Those are some of the questions we always ask. And so with my company, an airway product, an endotracheal tube, that's something everybody's going to have to use at some point in their life. It's very likely you're going to have surgery at some point, or you could end up in the ICU. Think about the next COVID pandemic. People didn't die from COVID. They died from the secondary pneumonias they had from being on a ventilator for too long. So, it's a big problem. It affects, crosses all medical disciplines, and could make a real impact on patient care.
So I'm going to jump in. We have a question that would be good to answer here. So you talk about a roadmap for innovation. How often do you think physicians have an idea to solve a problem, but it doesn't go anywhere because they don't know how to navigate the process?
So I mean, part of the Creates system that we have is we want to have that facility so that physicians can come to us, not just in ENT, but in the university with ideas and have exactly that. I think that is a very intuitive question, because it's probably the most common thing, is that most people don't know what to do with their idea. I think there's like several ways to unpack that, and we can get to. It'll be interesting to hear what Mohit and Carl thinks about that. But I think one of the things is thinking that, I guess physicians are generally time poor, so thinking that they try to do it all themselves is a big mistake. Not having a multidisciplinary team or support around you, or building that group around you is a reason why it often falls apart. The second one is the opposite, is actually trying to hold on to it for too long, and not giving it up in a way that allows it to progress, because there's so many more important parts to the innovation process than the physician. The physician is obviously critical, but there's so many other things that need to happen, and not being able to let go during that process can be very difficult for a physician, and that can also lead to the problems. I think sometimes there's also a balance between sharing and not sharing. So you need to share your idea enough that you can get traction and people to help you, but then that can also create anxiety for physicians, because you don't want to share to have companies steal your ideas. So it's a real balance in between there. So I think the know-how is the critical piece, and probably the most critical piece, because as you can see, all of us have so many ideas, but it's the actual know-how of getting them executed is the most important.
Yeah. If I can just add, I'm having at least one such conversation with a physician every week at UPMC, right? People who have ideas, and then come to creates to learn exactly, what would a roadmap look like. And I think one of the things we have learned is for translation, you really need a lot of discipline. And part of that discipline is valuing your own time and effort, right? So if a physician comes to me, at least with an idea, the first thing that tells me is this is a person who cares about innovation, right? That's a fantastic signal. But at the same time, if you've been in this area for a long enough time, you realize idea is not where the real value is created. It's always in the execution. And sharing that with the physician, I think for them to realize the importance that it can be a good idea, but is it a good idea that they are willing to spend the next 5 to 7 years of their life really bringing to fruition? And if there are other problems that are also important to them, and they would rather like to choose which one do they want to start with. So, right, like in Dr. Snyderman's folder, which of the 30 would you want to attack first? That's an important skill, and we teach them that how to objectively choose the problem you want to go after that has a good mix of market potential, patient impact, and also satisfies the value signposts that the innovator has set for themselves. So again, it's a process that can be learned, and I think it's a process that's very necessary in a place like UPMC.
I'm just going to add to that we're very fortunate in the ecosystem that we live and work in here with the University of Pittsburgh, because we have a lot of opportunities to test our ideas. Partnering with the engineering school at Pitt or at CMU, we can work with students and sort of flesh out an idea to really understand, are we addressing the right problem? Do more discovery with clinicians, understand the market potential, and really know if there's a good opportunity there before we invest too much in it. And it also is a way of connecting you with the people that you would need to partner with. One of the things that's impressed me so much about this process in working towards getting a product to market is how much effort it takes. There's so many things that need to be done, and most physicians are very naive about how much work it takes, how much time is expended, getting a very simple product to market. You can't do it alone. You don't know enough unless you're willing to make this a full-time commitment.
One of the things that we're often taught is to look at problems that are costly. So admitting patients to hospital, intensive care, keeping them in hospital are all very expensive things. So any ways that we can reduce those kind of classic ways to kind of look where value is. If we can shift to a lower cost provider, shift it from an ENT to a primary care physician, or a primary care physician to a nurse or a healthcare provider outside the hospital, these things are all lower costs to the system. Of course, anything that reduces complications before they happen is going to make a big difference. So these are things that I often look for if in terms of the value proposition of what we're trying to do. If you can do one of these things and more of these things, it can often be something that we can aim for. I kind of we've gotten onto this a little bit. Maybe Carl, you answered this a little bit. Mohit, how do you make a choice when you're starting to come up with ideas of what to pursue next, especially if you have more than one idea that potentially may solve the same solution, the same problem?
Yeah, I think it happens. You make a choice at two levels, right? First is which problem to go after, and then once you've decided the problem, then which solution to go after. I think making a choice on the problem level, we use these things. I use these things called filters, which are a definition of what matters to me. Is patient impact important to me? Then I'll create an objective list of, okay, does it affect 100,000 patients? Does it impact 1 million patients? Does it impact 10 million patients? Similarly, I can have a filter around the level of impact it creates for a patient. Is it a quality of life improvement? Is it a morbidity improvement? Is it a mortality reduction? So you come up with a set of 3 to 4, or I come up with a set of 3 to 4 filters, which have objective ratings. And then I do research on all the problems that are in my current ecosystem, and do the literature research to figure out where do all of those problems solve. And if you do this with enough rigor, basically almost objectively sub-needs rise to the top because they have a good mix of all of these things of patient impact, market potential. For concepts is similar, but in concepts, instead of setting up things like patient impact, market, you are maybe more geared towards how effective they are in solving the clinical challenge that's in front of you. You evaluate the potential safety risks of a device. You compare them on basis of cost and usability. So there we have more of a safety, efficacy, usability, and cost criteria that guides us to the right concept.
I was going to just add, I always like to refer to this psychological experiment on jams. So, Mohit and Carl, you probably have a lot of different, sometimes a lot of different solutions to the same problem. And one of the things that's really interesting is that when we try to think of ways to solve problems, you often have to expand the problem to be greater than that, or expand the number of solutions greater than what you that first comes to mind. And when you look at it, at the studies around decision making, if you have too few options or you have too many options, both of those lead to probably the wrong decision. And there's probably a sweet spot around deciding between maybe 3 to 5 different solutions. And one of these that's kind of highlighted that was the decision making around this experiment they did where they would set up a little stall of jams at the supermarket, and one stall had 24 jams and the other stall had 6 jams. And you can see there, if you had 6 jams, you get a 30% conversion of the customer buying a jar of jam. But if it was 24, only 3%. And you think, at first you think, well, maybe if you got more choice, you're more likely for the customer to find a jam that they like. But actually, it led to a decision paralysis, so they couldn't make a decision because there's too much choice. And that can actually happen a lot when we're innovating, is that sometimes if you expand it to have too many options, you really have difficulty. So I agree with what's been said, is that often you need to use a filter to try and really bring down those decisions or those choices to a minimum number, but a reasonable number that you can still, you're not committing to one single one just yet. And part of that is a way that we kind of promote here in Creates, is to kind of go through the filters in a kind of a risk analysis approach.
Yeah, just to add to that one thing, right? Often I've seen when people make these decisions, they think it's a comment on the idea, right? People are very protective of ideas. So thinking that, okay, one concept is better than the other concept usually only leads to more friction than is needed. The mindset that I've always had when doing this kind of selection is you're trying to enhance your probability of success. And of course, you don't know the future. So you're estimating based on your current knowledge, which of these concepts has a higher probability of success and therefore deserves more of your time. So really realizing that there is your time is valuable, and if you're stuck in paralysis again, then there is no impact. At some point in time, the money runs out, and then it does not matter if you knew at the end of that cycle which is the best concept to go forward with, if you don't have the resources and the momentum to actually create that concept anyway. So it's a balancing game of probabilities of success and the resources you have at hand, both time and money.
I was going to skip over this a little bit. Oh yeah, so this is referring to that risk analysis and the question earlier about what to do when a faculty has an idea and comes to you with what to do next. And this is often what I'd run through with them in the lab. And once they go through this very small diligent process, I would say 90% of them realize that they're not working on something that is useful, and they actually change their mind. But the small amount would actually go forward and go, you know what, like I've gone through this small little vetting process. I think it's really useful, that there might be something in there. Let's explore it further. I think that has like 2 benefits. One is if you quickly work out that that you're probably not working on something that's useful, then you can change your mind very quickly and you haven't wasted your effort on it. And hopefully no money in it. But it also, usually those people are the inquisitive people that are asking the right questions, and they can probably refocus to something else. Carl, do you have any other filters that you put through when you're thinking, or when other faculty ask you for help about, how could they maybe think about whether or not they're working on something good, or how could they de-risk what they're working going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I may have a great idea, but if it's too remote from my own area of expertise, then it's going to be hard for me to connect with the right people. So that, that's killed some of my ideas early on. Or, some of my ideas are software solutions. And so I don't really have the access to people that to work with me on creating software programs. And also that's perhaps a harder thing to develop in some respects. So I haven't pursued some of those ideas. And then you also have to remember there's an opportunity cost. If you're pursuing one idea, then you're not pursuing another one. And so you've really got to look hard at all your ideas and say, okay, which one gives me the most bang for the buck? What's most likely to be successful, has the greatest clinical impact, and say, yeah, I'd love to do all these things, but there isn't just enough time or resources to do it all. You've got to make choices.
This is kind of like a checklist that I kind of use at that final stage, is that if you tick all these boxes, then you probably have something that you can work going on. So, of course, if you address an important unmet medical need, if it probably has a large patient population, which usually means a large market, if you think that you have an okay pathway to get there, which is usually a clinical and regulatory pathway, and that somehow, some way, the physician or the health system can be reimbursed for that. Because there's always risk in going forward, if there's intellectual property that can be attached to that to protect that risk, that's also helpful. If the team behind it is a good team, it's also a critical need. And then, of course, all of that is going to cost money, so as long as that's reasonable. And I think that usually ticks the boxes of whether or not it's a good idea. Anything else that you would add to that, Mohit?
I just wanted to know, sort of in the context of the webinar so far, like it might look overwhelming to people, but then this is almost like fact, like this is the kind of research we just have to do beforehand. So the only step back I would take from this is, in my expectation, especially with a lot of doctors I work with, I think these terms, like just knowing the meanings of these terms, maybe actually the first good step everyone can take, right? Like not everyone's familiar with how a medical device reaches them. So one exercise I like to do with the fellows here is I ask them to pick up something that they find innovative in their practice and just think about how it reaches them. How much might it have costed? How much really did it improve the standard of care? And as you think through that, I think you will also start adding to this list of what you define as a good idea. And you'll probably see all of it traces back to the bullet points that Peter has shared. This
is, I think, some key points about the process, about what to do if you have an idea. And I think this is a really good article if people want to read it. But I think the first thing to do is to try and combine as many people or different ways in your team and perspectives. And the term conceptual collisions is a really good reason, and it's the reason why in Creates we have the fundamental intersection of physicians and engineering, because at least that's the conceptual the conceptual collision of those two philosophies. But I think the other thing that's really neat with physician and physician innovators is that there's often known ideas in other disciplines that can be applied in novel ways, and I think physicians are ultimately very good at doing that. So I think having a broader scope to look outside your specialty or subspecialty, looking at other innovations in other worlds and looking at how they can be applied. I think that really applies a lot to ENT in particular, because if you look at ENT as a patient population of, compared to say cardiovascular or neurology, I mean we're tiny compared to those. So often those have been the first areas for innovation, particularly for devices. But then we're able to bring some of those learnings into ENTs in the ENT field. I think the other thing is just to keep asking questions of people around you, and so getting consults and asking for help and ideas is really important. Any other these are kind of my mantras. Any other mantras that you use, Carl?
Yeah, there's a book on innovation in general that I read, and the key attributes that they talked about, one is questioning, which we've emphasized here. The other is observation. So getting out there, seeing what others are doing, especially in other disciplines, as you've mentioned, networking, walking into somebody else's operating room to see how they solve problems, going to a conference, listening to lectures that you wouldn't normally listen to. Experimentation. You can sort of test an idea by doing a little mini experiment first to see if that makes a difference, and then build on that through iteration to solve it. And it seems to me I'm missing one other one, but I think that's the basic process.
Actually, you raised a really important point. I'm going to throw that to Mohit about experimentation or prototyping your idea. And that I think that's really important to realize that you don't have to build the whole thing
Yes.
to test it. Mohit, I wonder if you want to just hit on that a little bit, because that's really where the engineers can help you out.
Yeah, great. I think, and I think that's also where engineers might actually send you in the wrong direction, right? Like this is where you pick the right partners, because if you are in the service of, first you have to just ask yourself, am I in the service of the idea or am I in the service of patients, right? Because if you're in the service of the idea, then you're going to find an engineer or a design consulting firm and tell them, I sketched this out, build this for me, which is usually not the pathway that we recommend. If you're in service of the patient and the impact for the patients, I think then you work with your collaborators in engineering and just discuss the actual pathophysiology. It's the why. Can you break down your problem that your idea is trying to solve uh, at a very fundamental scientific and technical level, and then open yourself up to brainstorming again. So parking your idea on the side and giving the problem a best shot is one thing that I really recommend. And after that, if your idea that you originally had still bubbles to the top, still seems like the best shot you have at translation, that's great. But yeah, being open to that, as you know, open exchange, no hierarchy, I think that's probably one of the most important pillars in innovation for me.
I have one more, I guess, an idea of prototyping. So this is the device around patient warming. So one of the first things was trying to describe your idea to other people, and that's where we come up with a looks like prototype. Clearly, I think there's some sticky tape and pipe cleaners in there, but so very, very basic. But it's really trying to explain your idea, and then we wanted something that would work like that. So you can see there's a patient there with some heating devices strapped to the foot and back of the knee, with some compression stockings around with some monitoring. Again, this all cost, I think they cost maybe a few $100s to kind of do. But we're able to prove the concept and drive some warming around there before getting a little bit more sophisticated, where we're able to build a prototype that we could use in a hospital setting, but still almost homemade there. You can see there was some piping that we got from Home Depot and some heating pads that we sewed together with one of our engineers' mothers did some sewing for us. So it was really still homemade, but it was allowed us to get the clinical data before we really got to something that we're now pushing through the FDA. So you don't necessarily have to build the whole thing, but you can test your ideas out in many ways to get there. I was going to get to the last point here is when do you stop? So, obviously you're trying to develop this product. We're sitting we're seeing patients in clinic or doing surgery. We're sitting in the university. How do you do the next step, or when do you know when to stop of outlining the process, and how do you get people to take over or take on that co-development role and take it forward? Carl.
Yeah, I don't know if I have a good answer for that, but there are several avenues. If you're not ready to give up your day job and devote a lot of time to developing a company, then you have to hand over your idea to someone else. So you can get a patent, and then the university can shop it around, and they can license that patent to a company or another startup. So there are ways of getting your product out there without you being directly involved. but you have to be able to sort of let go of it. How much time do you have to pursue it? In my own career, I'm sort of the latter part of my clinical career, so this is a good transition for me to invest more time now in my entrepreneurial activities, less time in my clinical activities. So I hope to continue to grow this part of my career and get more products out there in the market. But I guess you never really stop. You just look for different ways of getting it done. And then there's also the opportunity of just, partnering with an existing company. There's nothing wrong with going to a company and pitching your idea and seeing if they want to use their resources to co-develop it with you.
Mohit?
Yeah, I just think you need very strong milestones for yourself on where do you see the project being at what point in time. And if you're not achieving those, that's a good indicator that you might be spending time and resources that you don't have. But it's one of the hardest questions to answer, because the other part of this is there will be a lot of struggles which will motivate you to stop. So you have to resist the urge to stop something just because it's hard. But then you also have to have the confidence to stop something when you just know that fundamentally the project does not make sense. Or I think if you have key hypotheses around your projects, which are defining the level of risk that the project has, and one of them gets answered in a way that it's like, if you assume there was a red flag somewhere and it turned out to be true, then it's okay to then stop the project and not worry about the fact that you've already spent so much time on it. So that's never a good reason to continue something, that I've already spent too much time on this. But yeah, having a very strong set of milestones and having very strong hypotheses of what defines the level of risk in your project, I think, are two tools that help knowing when to stop.
So pause and hand over. Heather, do you have any questions from?
Well, I do. We have one question left and we have 7 minutes. As we are in the UPMC PIT system family, we have wonderful resources here to help with innovation, moving things forward. What would a physician do if they weren't in this system and they had an idea? How would that work?
That's a difficult question. So I think what attracted me to come here was having that system. So I've always tried to find that ecosystem around me, because it's very hard to do it outside systems and having the support. I think the support is on a number of levels. So I think it's really attractive here because they have, if you look at we call it the innovative pipeline, you have people who don't know what they're doing but want to do something, people that have an idea but they don't know if it's good, people that have an early idea but haven't proved it, people that have proved it but they haven't developed it, people that have developed it haven't yet launched, people that have just launched, people that now have success and then come back. So that entire pipeline of innovation exists here. And there's that constant mentorship of that next level, being able to mentor that other level. There's also that pipeline of funding. So we have programs and funding for every step of that innovation journey. And so at the very beginning is the Creates Lab. It's like, I just want to learn where to start. And so I think having those systems for me have been critical in being successful, having those people and mentorship and advice. I think if you're outside that system, I would do my best to get inside that system in some way, and to collaborate with your local university or become involved in the ecosystem. I think one of the real cool things that we've launched here at Pitt is called the Community of Innovators. So you don't necessarily need to be in the system to be part of that. You can be an outside mentor or coming in and be part of that. But other ecosystems kind of exist in that way that you can get involved. But that's what I think is that everyone needs help. So you're going to need to grab that help from somewhere. Carl, do you have any other thoughts there?
Yeah, I think those are great suggestions. I mean, you can always partner with somebody, who's in the network already. I've had community physicians come to me with ideas and I give them advice, and some of them are very good ideas that could be developed further. In some cases, we've pitched them to student classes to work on for a semester to really sort of test the ideas, do a market analysis. And there are a lot of people who want to give back to this community. I've had patients, I have a former patient who's actually on my advisory board for my company, and we reconnected after many years. He's a long-term cancer survivor, and he wanted to give back to the medical community by offering his expertise in the business world. And so there are a lot of ways to get a good mentorship and guidance from the community. There are a lot of people who donate their time and effort to the Pitt pipeline here and mentor groups of students and provide free, whether it's legal assistance or business advice. There are a lot of people who want to help.
I would also add, I think conferences are a great place to network and find people who are interested in the same programs. If you're not in Pitt, but you're still in an academic setting, then NSF runs this program called ICORPS, ICORPS, which is particularly targeted towards training people on how to create a product innovation roadmap, has some potential funding at the end of it. The last point, the other two ways is you may not want to start with your idea right away. You could potentially see if you can be a medical advisor to someone who's already going through this journey and learn through them. And also expand the definition of translation, right? Like that's something we're doing at Pitt, and not every type of translation requires huge monetary support. Is there some kind of innovation you can do just in your own community? How you deliver care, small things that you can change that maybe make it easier for people in your community to access care. I think all of that will just get you started enough. It will get you a taste of real life application of your ideas. And that then allows you to get a new set of mentors on board. Like it all builds from there. So one is like, just create the impact that you think you can create for now. And slowly and steadily, that practice of innovation will also grow from there.
But I think the specific answer that Carl mentioned is super important. If you're a physician outside the network, try and collaborate with people that are inside, because they're going to be able to bring the resources with you. It's very hard to do it on your own anyway. So the more people that you can bring along with you, the better.
Thank you all so much. You know, we are really lucky to have the CREATES program, and Mohit is sitting in one of our offices at Ioneer Institute on the first floor. It's an innovation and training hub, and we're always growing it and looking for other people to join us. So thank you. I hope everyone had a great webinar learning from us. If any questions come over, we'll answer them afterwards. And we will see everyone in 2 weeks for an ophthalmology webinar. Have a good day. Thank you.